When I first became Assistant Minister earlier this year, I was impressed by the enormous commitment in our community to tackle complex issues of housing and homelessness. I've seen that in my electorate of Plenary. I live in the Redcliffe Peninsula, just north of Brisbane, and I've been a member there since 2013. Before that, I was involved in the private sector, so I never had a government job until I was elected as a federal member in 2013, and I've seen locally what happens in my own electorate and the many people that contribute and help in this sector there. Since being appointed Assistant Minister, I've learned a lot more and pleased to see what your contribution is making. The innovative thinking and new ideas put into alleviating homelessness and increasing the nation's supply of affordable housing is impressive. It really is. Based on what we saw at the Australasian Housing Institute Awards last night, innovation is at the centre of the sector's work to address issues such as homelessness. And for those of you who were at the awards dinner last night and here today, I want to congratulate all the nominees that were nominated last night, as well as the highly commended and award winners. Earlier this month I attended Homelessness Week in Tasmania and in Hobart, and it focused the nation's attention on the challenges involved, and the theme for Homelessness Week this year was Housing Ends Homelessness, and it brought social, community and housing needs to the forefront of the conversation. I also travelled to New South Wales recently and down to Sydney and attended a street walk in Newtown. During this time I had the opportunity to speak with a number of people experiencing homelessness. I was accompanied by the Newtown Neighbourhood Centre there, the Newtown Outreach. It was a dedicated group of volunteers mainly. People just give up their time every week, reaching out into their local community, getting to know and stopping, not just walking past people that are homeless or begging on the street, stopping and actually speaking with them. And I met people who were sleeping rough, people that were in boarding houses that transitioned from sleeping on the streets into boarding houses, which is still classed as homelessness. And some people were struggling with mental illness, some were alcoholics, some were escaping domestic violence and fractured relationships, some had nowhere to turn, some had simply just, struck bad luck, some had made poor choices in their life but leading them in this direction. But their stories reflected the many ways in which a person can find themselves without the security of a home. It was an eye-opening, deeply valuable experience, and one that I believe has been vital for me in this role. I've also met with several organisations who deliver a range of community services aimed at improving housing and homeless outcomes for families and individuals across Australia, including Anglicare, Churches of Christ, Brick Housing and the Breakfast Club, to name a few. Discussing possible policy solutions with people on the front line of service delivery like yourselves is imperative to developing future policies and strategies that are going to achieve real outcomes. The federal government is committed to increasing the supply of affordable housing so that homes are available for those that need them and to relieve issues of severe overcrowding. Severe overcrowding, as you heard from the Northern Territory Minister just a moment ago, now accounts for around 44% of homelessness in Australia. And if you're going to do something about homelessness, then you need to address that figure. Of course, homelessness is not great for good life outcomes. It's certainly not good for building positive relationships, which is so important and what life is about. I'd encourage you, if you have any suggestions that could make real impacts in relation to that, make sure you feed that back into me and our department at the federal level. We want to hear from you, your suggestions and frontline experiences. Yesterday I met with the local shelter groups from each state as well, a national shelter, and I've asked them to feed in their suggestions to me so we can actually get a real impact on the ground over the next 3 years and of course beyond. We also know, as the Northern Territory Minister highlighted in his address to you, that Indigenous Australians are overrepresented in homelessness and public housing and underrepresented in home ownership. Overcrowding conditions continue to persist in many remote communities. Right here in the Northern Territory, as the Minister said, homelessness is 12 times the national average, and over 80% of all homeless people are Indigenous. Over the past decade, the Australian Government has invested some $5.4 billion across states and territories to address overcrowding in remote communities through the National Partnership Agreement on Remote Indigenous Housing. And these partnership agreements have delivered thousands of new homes, some 7,500 refurbishments on existing dwellings across 300 communities. But there is a lot more to do, much more to do. I spoke with the first National Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Australians, Hon Ken Wyatt, my colleague, and told him I'd really be keen to get out with him into remote communities and look at some of the issues around community housing, social housing and homelessness with him in these areas. And indeed I've also spoken to the Prime Minister and said through the Prime Minister's office that we need to continue to invest in this area. Minister Wyatt expressed his commitment to looking at ways to improve housing outcomes for his people, and through listening to elders, families and communities to drive practically locally led change. Earlier this year too, the Australian Government and the Northern Territory Government entered into a new national partnership for remote housing. Through this agreement, the Australian Government is investing some $550 million to improve remote housing outcomes. And this funding is being matched by the Northern Territory Government to create a joint $1.1 billion remote housing investment over the next 5 years. And the Honourable Jerry McCarthy, who I met this morning, seems like a decent man, and who addressed you earlier today, mentioned that there's another $550 million from his government for a further 5-year commitment. After that, I look forward to working closely with Jerry here in the Northern Territory, and I want to thank him for his government's commitment to social housing, as he addressed you earlier today, saying that there's almost 1 in 5 social houses here in the Northern Territory. Obviously there's a higher need, but I think that's a real commitment from the Northern Territory Government, which I was pleased to hear. For the first time in a national partnership agreement, the Northern Territory Land Council has a seat at the table to participate in decisions of broad policy and strategy for remote housing under this agreement. This will result in more informed housing outcomes for Indigenous Territorians. The Indigenous Home Ownership Program under Indigenous Business Australia provides targeted support and concessional loans for Indigenous people who are unable to access mainstream finance. First Nations people are also supported through mainstream housing services funded under the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement and also Commonwealth Rent Assistance. While work is underway, we face significant issues, including the gap in social and affordable housing across all states and territories. All states and territories, or all states in particular, experience a growing shortage of affordable housing. And this is why the theme of your conference behind me here, Housing Future Communities, is particularly relevant. It's also why the Prime Minister, who we just heard for, is appointed dedicated Minister for Housing, who we also just heard from, and myself as the first Assistant Minister for Homelessness, Community Housing and Community Services, and along with Senator Ann Ruston, who's the Minister for Families and Social Services. We've got a strong team of ministers committed to helping in this space. And I said to the Prime Minister when he asked me to be the Assistant Minister in this space, well, why is it important to you? And traditionally this space comes under the Constitution for states and territories. They have the main focus on this area, but the Prime Minister wanted to make it clear to states, to territories, to people like yourselves that are here today, that it is important to him and that he wants to do something about it, not just in the long term, but over our next term in Parliament. It's just a few months ago that we were re-elected, Scott Morrison and the Morrison government. We want to get some wins in this space over the next term. I, of course, take this role as Assistant Minister very seriously, and I want to assure you that I'm committed to engaging with all levels of government, not just meeting with state and territory colleagues, but also Lord Mayors and Mayors throughout the country as well. As soon as I was appointed to this minister, I also wrote to the other 150 members in the House of Representatives in Federal Parliament in a bipartisan way and say, I'd love to work with you in your electorates, to hear from you, to try and get good positive outcomes on the ground. And each of the 76 senators that are represented in Federal Parliament, because every single one of us can make a difference. And for those people that are here today, that are Australian, talk to your local federal MP about the work you're doing. It's very powerful to talk to the MP where you live. You can write to different MPs around the country, but it's always more powerful to talk to your Member of Parliament and to write to them or to drop in and see them at a mobile office and just tell them a little bit about the work that you're doing, because like myself, when I was elected in 2013, I came from the private sector. My background was in small business. I ran a small business with 15 staff, and so members of Parliament come from a diverse range of backgrounds, and they're not experts on everything, but we're always interested to hear from people in our electorates about what it is that you do and what information you can share with us. So I encourage you to do that. And of course, if you're from a state government, there's 12 senators in each state. 12 senators in each state that represent, in my case in Queensland, all of Queensland. So you can write with them, meet with them, make sure you chat to them as well. The Commonwealth invests some $6 billion a year on housing and homelessness services, and this is a substantial amount of money. It's important that this money is well invested and spent well. Obviously, through the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, this new agreement began in July last year, and it will provide almost $1.6 billion a year to states and territories to improve access to secure and affordable housing. Importantly, the agreement ensures funding for homelessness, which was previously provided through short-term agreements, as you heard the Prime Minister say in the video, is now ongoing and indexed each year. This will see an additional $125 million set aside for the states and territories for homelessness services each year, and that's on the condition that the states and territories match that funding as well. Required to have publicly available housing and homeless strategies that address priority policy areas. So I was pleased to hear the Northern Territory Minister in his speech outline how they are investing some of that funding as well, because traditionally the money goes to the states. There's not always a lot of accountability there, but it's left up to them to how they manage it. But I'm really looking forward to working with all the ministers in a bipartisan way to thank them for what they're doing and to make sure they get good bang for buck on every dollar invested. Understanding how and where Commonwealth funds is being invested, along with clear assessments of the area's greatest need, will provide more targeted spending than has been the case in the recent past. The level of social housing across the country remains a challenge, that we hope the new arrangements can address. The Commonwealth invests also around $4.6 billion a year on Commonwealth rent assistance to assist low-income Australians in the private rental market, and if you're involved in the community housing sector, you'll know all about that. Last year, the CRA supported more than 1.3 million Australians with their rent and into the private rental market. The assistance has substantially reduced rental stress. Without CRA, more than 2/3 of recipients would be paying well above their 30% of their income on rent, and some still do, of course, we know that. About 2.6 million of Australians, 10 million homes are currently rented. Of those, or of these, 430,000 are social housing, including about 100,000 which are community housing. And as I've indicated before to some of you, and today, the government is keen to look at new ways to increase and accelerate the supply of social affordable housing. I think more can be done in this space. Last year, as the Minister for Housing was mentioned in the video, we set up the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, or NHFIC, to help reduce pressure on housing affordability. The corporation will provide $1 billion for critical housing-related infrastructure to accelerate the supply of affordable housing through the National Housing and Infrastructure Facility. And the NHFIC offers loans, grants and concessional financing to support new houses or housing under the Affordable Housing Bond Aggregator. In March this year, the corporation successfully launched its first bond valued at some $315 million, and the bond will pass on the benefits of 10-year interest-only loans to community housing providers. NHFIC also announced its first ever construction loan to Blue CHP worth $45.7 million, which will build at least 93 new affordable homes in New South Wales, where of course land is very expensive. The corporation's role includes administering a new first home loan deposit scheme, which will commence on the 1st of January next year, and support around 10,000 first home buyers each year, as well as researching housing supply, demand and affordability. The boost it is giving to community housing is of particular importance. The dedication and innovative thinking coming from the community housing sector is inspiring, and I thank you for it. There is a real determination to make a difference. In Canberra earlier this month, I attended an event with Homes for Homes, handed over the keys to a community housing project run by Havelock Housing Association, which will provide safe and secure long-term housing for older women, including those women escaping domestic violence. I know they've got representatives here today and exhibited outside. But women over 55 become the fastest growing group of homeless people in the country. For those of you who are not aware, Homes for Homes is an independent organisation set up by one of Australia's most successful social enterprises, The Big Issue. You've seen their vendors, some of whom are homeless, marginalised and disadvantaged people, selling The Big Issue news magazine on the streets in our cities. The Big Issue focuses on providing assistance to homelessness and other disadvantaged Australians, and under Homes for Homes, donors, both individuals and property developers, agree to include a caveat in their property title which enables a tax-deductible donation of 0.01% of the sale price to be donated to Homes for Homes when a property is sold. So it's a small amount that is contributed each time the home is sold that goes back into community housing. The funds raised are then granted to experienced community housing providers to increase the supply of social and affordable housing. And the federal government's provided a $6 billion funding over 4 years in seed funding just to support this innovative project, to get it off the ground. We hope to see it rolled out in other states. As some of you are aware too, the national regulatory system for community housing is under review. The Commonwealth is providing $1.1 million to the review, which my department is jointly leading with the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. The Commonwealth is dedicating resources to the review because we want the national regulatory system to realise on its promise to help grow the sector. And last night at the Australasian Housing Awards, I was talking to one of the winners and said, well, you've been involved in this space for over 20 years. What is one of the most important things that we can do? And she spoke about regulation. Community housing regulation traditionally is a state policy issue, and it's important that states work together to build a regulatory framework that is more national in character, and I'll continue to raise that when I meet with state ministers over the next few years. I'm pleased to say that the sector is actively supporting the review. We had 45 submissions in response to a discussion paper from individuals, state governments, peak bodies and community housing organisations. There's a number of regional deals where the government is entering into. The Barkly regional deal, where the Commonwealth has committed $15.9 million to increase housing supply and reduce overcrowding in the Barkly region. And this housing project's including building student accommodation at Tennant Creek, where the minister's from, entering a public-private partnership for new social and affordable housing stock, and delivering a one-year affordable trial of the Aboriginal Hostels Limited at Tennant Creek facility to reduce nightly tariffs for residents of low incomes. We've also got city deals rolling out around the country which will have community housing in it. We've also got the Hobart City deal, which is $30 million happening right now to alleviate some community housing concerns in Hobart. And we've also got Safe Places, which is about to roll out, which is a program designed to help women and children escaping domestic violence. It's some $60 million, small amount of money, but it's a good start to help community housing providers provide more shelters for women and children. So this will go to tender in the next few months, so I encourage you to look into that, and you might know places in your states and territories where that can be rolled out. In conclusion, I just really want to thank you again for the work that you're doing. Thank Huri for putting on this event. Your conference comes at an important time, and it's implicit in its theme, the vital question, how are we to house communities of the future? The Morrison government recognises, as I said, the importance question that you pose. We are committed to partnering with the community to build capacity and support innovation in housing services. And I look forward to meeting many of you in my travels around the country over the next couple of years. Thank you.